I didn't know a heart could feel both ancient and newborn in the same hour, but that's what Thanksgiving did to me. I'm Jordan, 47, a mother who memorizes her children's laughter the way other people memorize hymns, a woman who still uses her grandmother's blue china because it makes me feel rooted. I had been up since 5 that morning basting a 20-pound turkey and braiding herbs into a cornucopia centerpiece, like some small spell to keep our family whole. Hunter drove in from Chicago in his sharp jacket looking older around the eyes. Faith tumbled through the door with grad school stories and too many bottles of wine. For a moment, with the cranberry sauce bubbling and the mashed potatoes still steaming, I let myself believe the sound of home could drown out anything. Then Taylor's phone buzzed again. And again. And again. He didn't look at me when it happened. He stood chair legs, shrieking against the wood, cleared his throat, and put on that tone he uses in boardrooms when he wants people to think he's already decided what's best. "I have something to tell everyone," he said, and my stomach dropped because I knew that tone, like I know the grandfather clock's sigh. "I'm selling the house." He talked about Holly and the kids and 5 bedrooms and good schools, as if he were reading a glossy brochure, as if the life he was proposing didn't require burning down the one we'd built. Faith's glass stopped halfway to her lips. Hunter's fork clattered. I didn't breathe. I watched my children's faces fall, and I learned there are kinds of pain that make no sound at all. So I stood, walked to the kitchen, came back with the cream-colored envelope I'd kept ready for 3 weeks, and set it by his plate. "Since you're making announcements," I said, then took a bite of sweet potato casserole that suddenly tasted like ashes. He didn't open it. Not then. But from that moment on, the house no longer felt like a place, more like a stage, and I was done playing the silent wife who exits in Act 2. You should know a few things about me before we go further. I'm not the dramatic type. I fold towels the same way every time. I inventory the pantry in pencil and keep a cash envelope for the electric bill because I don't trust paperless when the lights are at stake. I stayed married to Taylor for 23 years because I believed in maintenance. You tighten the screw, you oil the hinge, you don't throw away what you can repair. But you can't repair a man who vanishes into his phone while you're carrying a roasting pan alone, who smells like cologne you don't own, who starts saying downsizing while glancing at listings with extra bedrooms. You can't fix a person who chooses an audience for his betrayal. What I did was pay attention. It started in spring with late nights and explanations that were plausible if you shaved off the edges. A group photo appeared on his phone, a petite blonde colleague with a bright, unlined face, standing just a little too close. Then another image cropped badly, where 3 small children leaned into him like they'd known his laugh for years. "Holly from accounting," he said, thumb hovering, already deleting. "She's going through a divorce." I wanted to believe him, wanted so badly I could taste it. But wanting is not the same thing as truth. By July, Faith mentioned seeing her father at the park pushing a little girl on the swing like a real family. My hands went cold. In October, on our anniversary, I wore the black dress he used to say made me look stunning and sat alone at our favorite restaurant while he called to say there was a crisis. He meant her. I ordered the most expensive wine and toasted a woman who was done swallowing lies delicately garnished as kindness. In the weeks leading up to Thanksgiving, I became my own archivist. Screenshots, bank statements, receipts for children's Tylenol and Princess Band-Aids I didn't buy. A joint credit card to an address that wasn't ours. I wasn't planning a spectacle. I was building an ark. On a bright Tuesday morning, I sat in the leather and mahogany quiet of Clayton Richards's office, the best divorce attorney in the state, according to the friend who finally confessed how many women he'd ferried to the other side of betrayals like mine. He didn't promise revenge, he promised a plan. "Men like your husband assume control is permanent," he said, tapping the folder of evidence. "They don't expect you to be prepared." I nodded. I was prepared. So when Taylor announced the sale of our home for Holly and the kids, I didn't scream. I placed my envelope. I watched my son's face turn to stone and my daughter's eyes fill with salt water. I asked him calmly how long Holly had been helping him make decisions about a house she didn't live in. He said it's complicated, which is what cowards say when they want your grace to do their dirty work. He slid the envelope into his jacket and pretended it wasn't there. Let him. Let it burn a hole he couldn't soothe with a lie. That night, I locked the bedroom door and slept like a woman whose spine had finally remembered how to stand. In the morning, he opened the envelope at last, hands shaking so hard the paper rasped like sand. "You transferred the deed," he whispered, color leaking from his face. 3 months ago, I said flipping a pancake. Amazing how much mail goes unread when you're busy playing house somewhere else. The house he'd tried to sell out from under me had never been his to give, not anymore. The kitchen smelled like butter and coffee and beginning. His phone rang. Holly wanted timelines and bedroom paint colors. He said there was a complication. I didn't look at him. I didn't need to. I had finally seen the length and width of what I could survive. He didn't touch his pancakes. He sat there, the man who once claimed breakfast was his favorite love language, staring at the documents he never thought I had the courage or the foresight to file. His fork clinked against the plate as if testing whether the world was still solid beneath him. I poured myself coffee, added cream, stirred, and waited. Not because I needed his reaction, but because silence is often louder than fury. Finally, he spoke, his voice hoarse. "You went behind my back." I looked at him, the man I'd known since college, the man whose hand I held through our children's births, and realized how little of him was left. "No," I said softly. "You went behind mine. I just refused to stay blind." His mouth opened, then shut. The phone buzzed again, her name lighting the screen, and I watched him flinch. "You don't understand, Jordan," he said, trying to summon that smooth tone that once charmed investors and neighbors alike. I had to. I needed something new, something that made me feel alive again. I swallowed the lump in my throat and thought about every night I'd stayed awake beside him, wondering why my touch wasn't enough. "You wanted to feel alive," I murmured. "So you killed us to do it." For the first time, he had no rebuttal. His shoulders slumped, his tie suddenly looked like a noose, and he seemed smaller than I'd ever seen him. That was when I realized I wasn't looking at the man who had betrayed me. I was looking at the man who had lost me. Faith came into the kitchen, still in her pajamas, hair a wild halo, her face puffy from crying. She stopped when she saw the papers spread across the table. "You did it," she whispered, awe threaded through her grief. I nodded, sliding a plate toward her. "Eat, baby. We'll need our strength." She sat, shoulders brushing mine as if to anchor me. Hunter appeared minutes later, his jaw set like stone, eyes cold when they landed on his father. He didn't speak to him. He just kissed my temple and poured himself coffee. The message was clear, the lines had been drawn. Taylor tried again, desperation leaking into his words. "Jordan, we can still—" "Stop!" My voice cracked, but it carried. "You don't get to rewrite this. You sold us out before you ever listed the house. You don't come back from that." He stood abruptly, grabbed his jacket, and stormed out, leaving the door swinging in his wake. The sound echoed through the house, but for once it didn't hollow me out. Instead, it rang like punctuation. A sentence had ended. Over the next week, the house shifted. It had been his kingdom, his showroom, the place he paraded for colleagues. Now it became mine. I painted the guest room with Faith yellow and bright. Hunter repaired the squeaky step he'd always teased me about. We cooked together, laughed in the kitchen, and for the first time the walls felt like they belonged to us, not him. But betrayal is never neat. He called, begged, threatened, cycled through remorse and rage. He sent roses once, but they wilted on the porch because I never opened the door. Holly sent me an email, arrogant, dripping with pity, telling me I should let him go gracefully. I laughed so hard, tears rolled down my face. Grace, I thought, is for the innocent. Clayton. My attorney called to update me with the deed transfer and my evidence. The case was solid. "He'll fight." "Of course," he said. "Men like him hate losing face, but you're 3 steps ahead." At night, when the house quieted, I walked the halls barefoot, touching the walls like they were old friends. This was the place where I rocked my babies, where I hosted every Thanksgiving, where I wept in the laundry room so no one would hear. And now it was the place I reclaimed, brick by brick, memory by memory. One evening, Faith found me in the living room staring at the fireplace. "Do you regret it?" she asked quietly. I shook my head. "I regret what he did. I regret believing I could fix him. But standing up for us, no. Never. She hugged me, her tears damp against my shoulder. You're stronger than all of us. No, I whispered back. I'm just finally strong for myself. The house groaned in the winter wind, but instead of sounding fragile, it felt alive, like it was breathing with me, holding me up, promising that even the deepest cracks could let the light in. The first snowfall of December came quietly blanketing the yard in a white silence that felt almost holy. I stood at the window in my robe, coffee steaming in my hands, watching flakes drift down onto the porch where his shoes used to sit. It was strange how quickly absence could become comfort. The driveway was his no longer. The key on his chain no longer opened this door. The house had shifted, yes, but so had I. When Taylor finally came back, it wasn't with roses or apologies, it was with lawyers. He thought he could bully me into surrender, thought his threats and his polished speeches could undo what was already done. Clayton and I sat across from him at a long mahogany table, and for the first time, I didn't shrink beneath his gaze. He talked about equity and contributions as if a dollar amount could measure the nights I held our children through fevers while he worked late meetings. He leaned forward, waiting for me to flinch, but I only slid the folder across the table, the photos, the transfers, the dates, the proof. Your Honor, Clayton said evenly at the hearing that followed, my client secured her family's home months before this betrayal was announced. Mr. Reynolds's actions were not just adulterous, they were calculated attempts to erase his wife's stability. We will not allow him to succeed. Taylor paled, his confidence cracking. Holly wasn't there, of course. Mistresses rarely want to sit in the ruins they help create. He tried to speak, stammered something about miscommunication, but the judge's face was stone. In that moment, I realized the power he wielded for so long had been nothing but smoke, and smoke vanishes when the light hits it. Faith squeezed my hand so tightly my knuckles ached. Hunter sat behind us, his broad shoulders shielding me as if he could absorb the shame his father should have carried years ago. When the gavel struck, the sound was more than justice. It was freedom. That night, I built a fire in the living room. Faith and Hunter curled up beside me, bowls of popcorn in their laps, while snow tapped gently at the windows. We watched an old movie, the kind Taylor would have called a waste of time. I laughed so hard my stomach hurt, tears rolling down my cheeks, and my children looked at me like they hadn't seen me in years. Maybe they hadn't. Maybe I hadn't seen myself either. In the weeks that followed, Taylor's calls dwindled. His messages turned bitter, then pathetic, then finally silent. Rumor spread that Holly had left when she realized he wasn't the man he pretended to be without the house, the image, the family to parade. He had gambled everything, and he lost. But I had already stopped counting his losses. I was too busy counting my gains. One afternoon, as I decorated the tree, Faith slipped a small ornament into my hand. It was hand-painted, the words in her careful script, "Our home, our strength, our future." My throat closed as I hung it near the top, the light catching on its surface. Hunter hugged me from behind, his voice low. "Mom, you saved us." I shook my head, tears burning. No kids, we saved each other. Christmas morning came with quiet joy. We opened gifts in pajamas, the air thick with cinnamon rolls and laughter. No tension, no eggshells, no glances at the clock waiting for him to come home from somewhere else. Just us, whole in our brokenness, strong in our togetherness. I thought of the woman I was a year ago, tired, small, clinging to scraps of love from a man who was already gone. And I thought of the woman now standing in her living room, the deed in her name, her children at her side, her heart scarred but steady. Betrayal had tried to hollow me out, but instead it carved space for a new life to grow. And when I stepped outside that night, snow crunching under my boots, I whispered to the cold stars above, "Thank you for breaking me open. Thank you for showing me I was enough all along." Spring came, and with it a sense of rebirth I hadn't felt in decades. The garden I once planted half-heartedly, because Taylor dismissed it as a hobby, with no return, burst into color. Tulips stretched toward the sun, daffodils lined the walkway, and for the first time in years, I let myself enjoy the simple act of kneeling in the dirt, hands stained, heart lighter. Each bloom felt like a declaration: we survived, we are still here. Neighbors stopped by more often than before. Mrs. Klein from next door brought lemon bars, her eyes warm with approval. "We've been watching you, dear," she said softly, as if confessing a secret. "You're stronger than anyone knew." I smiled, realizing that maybe everyone had seen the cracks in my marriage long before I admitted them to myself. Faith thrived, her laughter freer, her shoulders less burdened. Hunter began visiting more often, choosing weekends at home over city nightlife. We had family dinners again, not the stiff performances for Taylor's colleagues, but meals filled with real conversation and clumsy jokes. It felt like reclaiming not just the house, but our very selves. Of course, shadows still lingered. Sometimes I caught Faith staring out the window with a clenched jaw, grief hidden under her pride. Sometimes I woke from dreams of Taylor's voice sharp and cold and lay in the dark with my heart racing. Healing wasn't neat, but it was ours. The final blow came not from me, but from life itself. Months after the divorce was finalized, I heard through whispers, then confirmation, that Holly had left him. Packed up, disappeared with her children, leaving Taylor in a small rented apartment on the edge of town. They said he looked thinner, angrier, a man grasping at a future he had already burned. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Karma has a way of arranging its own stage. Instead, I chose to build. With the settlement secure and the house mine, I renovated the kitchen, painted the cabinets white, replaced the old countertops with granite, and finally fixed the leaky faucet that had dripped through so many sleepless nights. Faith helped me choose curtains. Hunter installed shelves. Every nail hammered was another piece of myself restored. One evening, as we sat around the new table, Faith raised her glass of sparkling cider. To Mom, she said, her eyes glistening, "For teaching us that even when the world tries to take everything, you can still rise and fight for what matters." I laughed through tears, clinking my glass with theirs. "To us," I corrected, "because we're a family, and families don't break, not when they fight together." The air in the room shimmered with something unspoken but undeniable hope. That night, when the house grew quiet, I stood in the doorway of my bedroom and took it all in. The walls I'd once feared would become someone else's, the floorboards that had carried both arguments and laughter, the roof that had sheltered my children since birth. It was still mine. Still ours. I realized then that revenge hadn't been about destroying him. It had been about saving us. About protecting my children, my home, and my dignity from the storm he unleashed. So here I am telling you my story, not for pity, but for truth. Betrayal can rip you apart. It can leave you gasping in the ashes of everything you thought you knew. But it can also force you to rise, to reclaim, to fight, and to find deep inside a version of yourself you thought was gone. If my story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe, and leave me a comment. Tell me, have you ever had to fight for your worth when someone tried to take it from you? I want to hear your story too.